Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Dragon M4A3 Sherman. Since the last video update, progress has been made to the model's front glacis plate detailing. We'll be going over these additions in this video. Before I go into the additions that were made to the tank's front plate, I'm going to take a step back and go back to the suspension to discuss a procedure that was done just prior to working on the front plate detailing that you see here. And here goes the lower hull with its weathering now completed. Just like with adding the prime and the base coat to the components prior to assembly and installation, it's also good to weather the lower portion of the hull at this point of the build, as once the model progresses past this point, it will be very hard to get access to this lower hull plate and suspension with all of the details that are going to be mounted to the top. In addition to adding the weathering to the rear portion of the wheels as well as the bottom plate of the hull, I also went ahead and painted the rear rims of the rubber tires. For the rear rims, I went ahead and painted them with flat black paint, and only the rims themselves were painted. Just like what I mentioned before with the lower hull, once the vehicle is flipped over, getting access to this portion of the model will be very difficult, so I took advantage of the vehicle in this position right now to add the paint to the rims. After the vehicle gets built and is coming to the end of its construction, the rest of the tire will be painted with the same paint and everything will be blended together. After the rear portion of the tires were painted, I went ahead and with a drop of red added a highlight to the Zerk fittings. The red highlight was added to all of the Zerk fittings on the lower portion of the hull. The Zerk fittings on these road wheels are found on both sides of the wheel, as the wheel is reversible. On US Armor, the Zerk fittings are always highlighted in red. This is true for not only US tanks, but also German tanks of the period. Just like with all heavy equipment, the wheels and the rollers need to be maintained by squirting in a lubricant. The lubricant is added with a small little grease gun or an oil gun, and that is connected to the fitting. To make the fitting more visible to the maintenance operator, they're highlighted in red. By doing this simple little addition to the Zerk fittings, it really also helps the model pop. The Zerk fittings on the exterior portion of the vehicle will be painted after the model is nearing completion. In addition to adding the black trim to the rear portion of the rubber tires, I also went ahead and added the weathering to the exhaust manifolds. This would include both the main exhaust manifolds on the rear of the vehicle and the Little Joe auxiliary exhaust duct that we have here running along the sponson. In addition to the rust weathering, some of the soot weathering has also been added, and it was applied via the airbrush. And like I just mentioned, here goes the rear exhaust manifold with its rust weathering added. Moving our way to the model's front glacis plate detailing, we can immediately notice that all of the detail that we see here are not the kit original. Rather than using the kit supply parts, I went ahead and replaced those with the better detailed variants from EastCoastArmory.com, as well as a Bowen 1919 from Panzerwerk.com. Starting with the fenders. The fenders are the sheet metal variants from EastCoastArmory.com. They are soldered together, and they do have their integral rigidity rib pressed directly into the fender, just like the real vehicle. Also, just like the real vehicle, they are mounted to the tank via 3 fasteners. As for the fasteners, there is a plate that is bolted to the top part of the sponson. That plate is discussed in a previous video. Not only is the side plate soldered on, but I also went ahead and soldered on the rigidity plate that is found on all Sherman tank front fenders. Moving our way to the transmission cover itself. To start with, we have here the tow cable clamp. The tow cable clamp is found on pretty much most of the mid to late war Sherman tanks, as well as most of the other details that you see on this tank are meant really for mid to late war vehicles. On the Sherman, the way the tow cable would be fastened would be on this location here. All Shermans that had the tow cable attachment had it in this location. The way the clamp worked is that there was a hinged wing nut on a threaded eyelet that would be loosened and would open up. This part here would hinge open, and the tow cable would have its eyelet neck placed in this location here. You would then close the clamp and then secure it with the wing nut. Moving our way from the tow cable lock, another little device that's found on the front of later war Shermans is that of the comb device. The comb device has a couple different variations to it. This, of course, is being that of the later one. The earlier ones were a simple plate with grooves cut into them. The later one was actually retractable and opened up and closed in this manner here. Purpose of the comb device is that it's actually used to tie up the brake lines on the inside of the tank for use of shipping. When the tank would be ready to be put aboard a ship, to make sure that the tracks are totally locked, the brake levers would be pulled tight via a string. The bow M1919 would be removed, and the string would be pulled through the hole that the 1919 would be in. The rope would then be put into one of these grooves over here, and then by closing the comb would add pressure to the brake levers and keep them in the nice and tight in the brake state. Once in the brake state, the tank's tracks will be locked and the tank can be put aboard the ship without having any worries about it moving around in rough seas. Moving up from the comb device takes us directly to the tank's M1919 machine gun. For the M1919, this required a little bit of a change from that of the kit original. To see how the kit original one looked like, the next following scene is going to go back to when I actually went ahead and removed the section of the hull. Here goes the tank with the plate left stock per the kit. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the details that you see here are pretty much carryovers from the 1/35th scale counterpart. In fact, a lot of viewers who are familiar with the smaller scale kits are going to be really familiar with the type of detailing that we have here molded in. For the bow M1919 machine gun, the kit has the tarpaulin rail molded in, as well as a very basic 1919 well. The kit also supplies you with a very basic M1919 ball machine gun, with the ball pre-molded in. As you can see, the barrel itself does have its cooling holes on the barrel shroud, and the dome is a two-piece casting. The machine gun itself is somewhat adequate. If you want to build it out of the box, it's perfectly okay. However, rather than keeping the kit section here, I'm going to be removing the kit well with the EastCoastArmory.com version, and the machine gun will be replaced with the one from Panzerwerk.com. Comparing the kit M1919 to the Panzerwerk version. Another advantage about adding the EastCoastArmory.com version, besides it having a more accurate appearance, is that the ECA version is designed to have the ball machine gun pivot. And here goes the M1919 machine gun well, now completed. In addition to adding the ECA 1919 plug The model also has the Panzerwerk USAV M1919 set. Like I mentioned in my other videos, the set from Panzerwerk is highly recommended and is very nicely detailed. The combination of the ECA plug along with the Panzerwerk bow M1919 allow the component to pivot left and right as well as up and down. This feature is not found on the stock DML kit. Also mounted around the 1919 is that of the tarpaulin rail. Tarpaulin rail is just a simple little bracket with little snaps on it that allows the use of a waterproof canvas bag to snap onto this location here. Purpose of that is to keep the machine gun from getting wet if left out in the elements. Moving on from the bow M1919 takes us directly to the tank's A-frame travel lock. Purpose of the travel lock is to secure the 75mm gun while in transit use. The ECA travel lock is fully functional in that it opens up, as well as the claws for the clamping mechanism for the 75mm gun is also fully functional. On the ECA travel lock, not only is the front portion of the unit detailed, but the detailing is also visible on the back portion as well. On the back portion is complete with both casting numbers, as well as the opener block that's found here. On the Sherman travel lock, the way you would open up the locks themselves would be by pushing up on this little block here. On the bottom portion of a block, there's a small little eyelet. By simply pushing upward on this little eyelet, the wedge-shaped block would move upward and would force the clamps to open up in the way you see here. The barrel would be placed, and then by lowering the gun, would secure the unit in place. One advantage about the ECA piece is that the tank can have its barrel clamped into this unit for display use as well. Moving our way to the model's headlights, as well as the horn. This is one portion of the build that the swap out of the kit parts really will help a lot in the look. Starting with the brush guards are the standard ECA metal ones. They are made out of soldered metal and have their plunger canister mounted onto them. As for what the plunger canister does, like I mentioned in my other videos, when the headlight is not in use, a small chain retained plunger would be pulled out of this canister here and inserted into the headlight mount to prevent moisture from getting inside the vehicle. As for the stock headlight guards themselves, on the kit original, the stock guards were fairly weak. Here I have a runner with the stock brush guard on it for the rear tail light. As we can see, the tail light brush guard is very thin and is definitely inadequate for use on the model. To compare it with the ECA version, we can see just how thin the stock one actually is. As for the headlight, the kit headlight was also replaced with the Resin ECA set. The ECA set has a clear resin blackout light along with the clear resin headlight lens. As for the lens itself, the lens will be added to the vehicle after the tank is painted. The headlights are mounted onto the ECA Resin M4A3 headlight post. The headlight posts have their welding detail integrally casted into them, and adding them was a very simple process. Moving our way from the headlight to the siren. For the siren on this vehicle, I opted for the ECA funnel horn. The funnel horn itself is mounted on top of a fabricated brass bracket that has a soldered nail on it that allows the horn to be firmly attached to the fixture. As for the guard, the brush guard is also the ECA version and is the horn variation in that it has the elaborate plus guard that prevents any type of shrubs from making contact with the siren, possibly breaking it. Also, another bit of detailing that helps the look on these Shermans is the addition of the siren's power cord, which emerges from the front glacis plate that we have here. Moving our way to the front lift hook. The front lift hook was replaced with the ECA version. The kit front lift hook itself was not necessarily bad. It's actually very usable. There's the front lift hook there. It has the right shape. It has nice little flarings that are found towards the feet. The reason why I opted to use the ECA one, for the simple reason that the ECA one has the integral cast numbers that are found on the castings themselves. On top of the lift hooks, we notice here a small little bracket that's welded to the top of the hull. The purpose of this bracket is for that of the side view mirrors. These mid to later period Sherman tanks featured side view mirrors for that of transport and highway driving. The side view mirrors were identical to ones found on Deuce and a Half trucks as well as Jeeps. This is a common little detail that is omitted on most model Sherman tanks, and the addition of this little piece of detailing here does help the look of it. As for this model, I will be adding the detail of the side view mirrors, as it's a common detail that really helps the look of the vehicle, but is most likely overlooked by most builders. More information on that is to follow. Also, as we can notice, all of the details that are found on the tank have their welding detail sculpted on. The welds act as both a detail element, but also give the piece a little bit more structural support and keep them onto the tank. In addition to adding the front glacis plate detailing, I also went ahead and added the side hull detailing for the model. This would include both the welding lines for the front glacis plate, the rear plate, as well as the side skirt rail, which was removed from the kit original. Like I mentioned in an earlier video, the kit does have a large bulbous side skirt rail integrally molded into the upper casting. The purpose of this piece of detail is a direct carryover from their 1/35 scale counterparts. The problem with the kit rail is that the unit itself is molded on too high in order to mold it in, and also its thick, clunky nature really hurts the look of the model and gives it more of a toyish feel as opposed to a serious model of a vehicle. The large, thick, undetailed bulbous unit was removed and was sanded flush in a previous video. To replace it, I went ahead and fabricated the rail out of strips of styrene. The styrene themselves are in segments, just like they are in the real vehicle. These Shermans had a few different styles and variations of the side skirt rail, but this version here is the most common. As for the rail itself, the rail is in 3 sections. We have a rail section in the front, a rail section in the center, and another rail section towards the aft. The rails themselves are a continuous size and from front to rear. On the front portion and on the rear portion, the rail does have a small little angle to it like we see here. Also, the holes are also a set size on these panels. Purposes of these panels would have been to mount on the side skirts, which are found on some Sherman tanks to prevent dust from bellowing out of the suspension. When the HVSS suspension came out and the tanks were upgraded to E8 specifications, the extended fender rails were mounted to the side skirt rails here. The extended fender rails extend outward from the sides of the vehicle, and then small little bosses would have been welded to the side hull. These bosses are where the struts, the support struts, get affixed to in order to give the side rail a little bit more support. The rails on the rear tank are spot welded to the vehicle in these locations here. If we notice where the 2 segments meet, there's a spot weld adjacent each other on each side. This is present on where the front strip meets the middle strip, and where the middle strip meets the rear strip. Another advantage about mounting on the new strip was that now it descends from the side hull in the correct manner. Like I mentioned before, the kit version strip was mounted up here, and the sponson was flush with the upper hull. For these pieces to mount on properly, they needed to descend from the side hull. By gluing on the strips in the manner I have here, I have about a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch depth for all the holes running from bow to the tank's aft. This small little easy bit of detailing also tremendously helps the look of the vehicle and really makes it look more of a presentable model. The rail detailing that you see here is a mirror image on the opposite side of the tank. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale Dragon M4A3 Sherman tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds, as well as other 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.